So today for our money work, we are going to be looking at estimating and rounding using money. Now we did do quite a lot of this back earlier in the year when we did estimate and rounding, but I have noticed through mental maths and other things that this is something people are still finding challenging. So I thought we would go over it today, particularly for money because it does use our decimals. So first of all, I want you to pause me and think about what is estimating and what is rounding. Okay, so when we round a number, we put it to the nearest something. So in this case, we've got the number 50. It's already sitting at a 10, okay? But say we had the number 47, and I asked you to round it to the nearest 10. We know that if we use a number line, and we've got 40 here, and we've got 50 here, that there would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 jumps until we get to 50, because there's 10 in between. So let's look at where 47 would be. So that would be 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47. So we know that 47 is closer to 50, so if we rounded it to the nearest 10, it would go up to 50. The easier way to think about this without having to draw a number line each time is to remember our rule for rounding. So say you were rounding the number 153 to the nearest 10. I'm rounding it to the nearest 10, so I know that every number after that will be a 0 once I have rounded it. So when I'm looking at the digit I'm rounding it to and the next smallest one. So in this case, I'm looking at the tens unit because I'm rounding it to the nearest 10 or the tens digit, and then I'm also looking at the unit because that tells me what's going to happen to this. Now, if the number here is 4 or less, we round down. If it is 5 or more, we round up. So what that means is if I was to round down to the 10, there would either be 150 or 160 would be the next 10 up, so we know it must be 150. So the number has gone down because 3 is less than 4. However, if the number was 157, we would know that 7 is 5 or more, and it would go up to the next 10, which is 160. So that's what our rounding is. One more example of how we would round a number. So what we've got here is 14,294, and I'm going to ask you to round this to the nearest 1,000. So I first of all look at the digit that I'm working with. So that is the nearest 1,000. So I know that this number is either going to stay at 14,000, so drop down to 14,000, or it's going to go up to the next 1,000, which should be 15,000. So it's either going to go down to 14,000, so that would be taking the 294 away, or we're going to add on to make up to 15,000. Now, how we work out which one it is we look at the next smallest digit. So in this case, it's the number 2. So if we remember our rule, if it's 4 or less, it goes down, and if it's 5 or more, it goes up. So what happens here? So it would go down, so the correct answer would be 14,000. So that's just a quick refresher of rounding. Now, when we talk about estimating, what that means is using rounded numbers to make a calculation. So if I ask you to tell me, for example, roughly how much this sum was, what could you do quickly to work it out? So I think I would choose to round it to the nearest 100. So we can see here, here's our 100 and here's our 100. We can see really easily that there's a 0 next to the 8, so that would go to 800 rather than going up to 900. And then here we can see that there's a 5 next to the 2, so this is going to go up to 1,300. So I pop those together and my estimated answer would be 1,300 plus 800, which would be 2,100. And you can see it's a really quick way to make a calculation to get a rough estimate of how much something's going to cost. We would use this in the shop to maybe work out if we've got enough money for something, or if you were trying to price up like a big job, for example, in your kitchen, you might add, you know, a few hundred for the oven, round it, you might add a few hundred for the unit tops, and do different things like that. So that's why we would use this in real life. But now let's have a look at what we would specifically do for money. Okay, so when we have money amounts, we just have decimal numbers. So for example, this amount here, this is £1.89. So effectively, this is just a decimal number. And as with most things with decimals, nothing really changes very much, apart from there's a decimal point there, and the decimal point is not allowed to move. Remember, that's our key rule with decimal points. So I'm actually just going to get rid of the pound sign, just so we've got 1.89, okay? Now, if I asked you to round this to the nearest unit, what would be the digit you would underline? So it would be the unit, because that's the nearest one we're rounding it to. And what would be the digit we use to help us decide? So it would be the next smallest, which would be the 8. So we can see here that this is more than 5, so we know that this is going to go up to the next unit, which would be 2. So it would be 2, and then you could put 0.0, because you know that's all going to go to 0. But do we need that 0 if there's nothing there? So you could either write your answer as £2 like that, or £2 like that would be fine as well. They mean exactly the same thing, because those zeros don't actually represent any pennies at all. Now what we did there is we rounded to the nearest unit, but we also rounded to the nearest pound. Now remember, when we're talking about money, the nearest, a unit is the same as £1. So if I said to round to the nearest pound, all I'm asking you to do is round to the nearest unit. Let's do another example of that. Okay, so we've got £17 and 54 pence here. So if I said to you, can you round that to the nearest pound, we know that that means to the nearest unit. So we start by looking at this, and we know it's either going to go down to £17, or it's going to go up to 18. So how we decide whether it's going to go down to 17 or up to 18 is we look at the next digit, and in this case it is the number 5. So we know that it's 5 or more and it goes up, so our correct answer would be 18. Again, it's exactly the same as writing 18.00, but we don't necessarily need to do that because those don't represent anything or any pennies. Now let's look at something slightly different. Say I asked you to round this number to the nearest 10 pence. Have a look at that number and see where the 10 pence column is. Okay, so it's just here. So this represents how many 10p's there are. In this case, there are 5 10p's. So that's also known as our 10th column if we're looking at a normal decimal. So you should be quite familiar with that. So we're rounding to the nearest 10. So I know that I need to look at this digit and the next digit. So this number is either going to go to £17.50, and that would be going down, or it's going to go up to £17.60. How do we decide? We look at the next digit. So it's the number 4, that's less than 5, so we know it goes down. So this would be our correct answer. A really common mistake people make is to forget about the numbers that are in front of what we're rounding, but you do need to keep them the same. So there's nothing changes with the 17, we're not looking at that, we're looking at the nearest 10 pence. So let's have a look at how we could use that skill to make an estimation. So if I asked you to estimate roughly the total cost of this for me. Okay, how could we use rounding to help us estimate the cost of this, these two items? So in this case, it would probably be sensible to round to the nearest pound. So let's have a look at how we could do that for both numbers. So we're rounding to the nearest pound, so we know this is either going to go up to 8 or down to 7. So let's have a look. We look at the next digit, it's a number 1, so we know that this would go down to £7. You could put your 00, but you don't need to. Next one, £11.99, so it's either going to go up to £12 or go down to £11. Let's look at the next digit, it's a number 9, so we know that it goes up to £12. So roughly 7 plus £12 is equal to 20, or sorry, that's not right, so equal to £19. I think I need my coffee this morning, primary 6. Okie doke, so that is how we use our rounding to estimate answers to calculations. Let's have a look at a much bigger number. Okay, so this is £42,341.19. So let's think about how we could round this to different digits. Now, just because the number's bigger doesn't make this any harder, it just means we have more numbers to do, so it takes a little bit longer. Nothing else changes, so please don't worry about the fact the number has gotten bigger. So, I'm going to try first of all to round this to the nearest £100. So, where is the £100 digit in this number? So it's just here, so we know that I'm worrying about this digit and the next one to it, which is this. Everything else we don't need to worry about. We know that the numbers here will stay the same, so it's going to be 42,000 and something, but let's work out what it is. So it's either going to be 42,300, and remember all of the numbers after what we're rounding to go to 0, or it's going to be 42,400. Just like that. So how do we know? We look at the next digit to the hundreds digit, which is a 4. We know that a 4 means it goes down, so it will go down to 42,300 for that particular one. So hopefully that has given you a little bit more of a top-up reminder about how to round, and particularly how to round decimal numbers. Just remember to think of what am I rounding it to, and then the next smallest digit. Keep the decimal point where it was to begin with. Remember, it can't move, and don't worry too much. So I want you to give your assignment a go and see how you get on with this skill.